Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, March 23rd, and I'm Caroline Bailey, a Professional Development Coordinator for the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to today's webinar, which is titled Why the SIS? Our presenter today is Natalie Illy from American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and our facilitator is Stephanie Jones, DDA's Director of Innovation. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to listen to the webinar, by computer and by phone. If you look at the panel interface on your right, labeled audio, you can click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. We will be recording the webinar and posting it on DDA's YouTube channel. Additionally, questions can be typed in the question or chat box on the webinar panel, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce Stephanie Jones. Good afternoon, Stephanie.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Caroline. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. We are glad to have. I see we're getting people are still steadily coming in. We are happy to have you. We would like to start off our program with just a couple of questions to see who we have joining us today. So, if Caroline, thank you for posting our first question. If you can respond to that. Okay. So a good mix of people joining us today from Southern Central Region, from across Maryland. Thank you, Caroline. And if you can post our second question. All right. Very good. Thank you all for taking the time to do that. We thought it would be good. It would be a good idea to just refresh everyone's memory on the SIS. It has been since 2018 since we've had a formal a webinar regarding the SIS. So I wanted to make sure that everybody's mind was refreshed on why we do the SIS, how it is used, and how, during the PCP plan development, and why it is important. So with all that said, I'm going to turn everything over to Natalie. At the end, we'll have time for questions, and we have one more, a quick poll to take towards the end. So thank you again for joining, and Natalie.
Hello. Yep. Hi, everyone. So yes, thank you so much for being here today. I am going to do my best to make sure that I give you some good information about the SIS. On the slide that you see there, also as I go through them, if you have questions or things that you want to make sure we maybe address or talk more about, please use the questions tab and put those in. I know that we can't speak maybe verbally through this, but we do want to hear more about what things you have questions about or what areas you want some direction on. And then as we go through it, and I'm seeing people start to put in questions, that's great. As we go through that too, I think we can make sure we try to address those that we don't in real time, we'll do at the end. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Just as Stephanie said, we're going to talk about 3 different reasons why the SIS is used, not only just in Maryland, but why it was selected in Maryland, then how it's used as a planning tool and what the information you see when you get the SIS report, what that means, and then also ways to use that information. So I'll give you a couple of strategies there. If you are curious more about the SIS itself, it might also be helpful to go and take a look at a couple of different websites to get more information. So even now I could kind of give you an idea of what those might look like, so that when you go into and take a look at even the maryland.gov, the support intensity scale, there's some information there. And then also today, the information I'm going to be sharing with you, you can find at the AADD website. So you'll see here, this is the SIS-A Respondent Resources page. It has on it a couple of videos that tell you a little bit more about what the SIS-A is, and then also the report. You also are welcome to download the Respondent Handbook. This is also a very helpful tool for you to take a look at and use as you need it. So as you kind of think through today what resources might be helpful to you, realize that those pages are probably the best place to go to find information, and then also reaching out to probably those folks that have either given you the SIS or that you have had some experience with before. So you hear me talking a lot about SIS or SIS-A. Let me clarify that for a minute. So the Supports Intensity Scale adult version actually began as just the SIS in 2004. And then in 2015, it was released as SIS-A because also around that same time, we released a SIS-C, a SIS for children. So they wanted to make sure the distinction was there. So in Maryland, we only use the adult version. So calling it SIS or SIS-A, it's the same thing. Just know that like during this presentation, I'll probably call it SIS-A quite a bit, just so that we are really clear that it's the adult version. And then in 2016, Maryland started to use it statewide. It was being used in Maryland before that, but this is when it became more launched at a statewide initiative to use. So when they were starting to think of why the SIS, for those of you that aren't as familiar with the background, realize that it was selected by a work group, and it included providers, it included DDA, self-advocates. A lot of groups or a lot of people were represented in that work group. And then they went to the SIS-A because it gathers information in a consistent way. It's based on reliable information, and it's a valid assessment. It's a formal assessment. So it was another reason why they chose the SIS. And then finally, it just really dovetailed well into the planning process. So it became a part of the person-centered process. So as you think a little bit more about what SIS is about, realize that the other reasons Maryland was looking at it at the time and how it fits now is that it really directly feeds into your person-centered plan process. And they were looking for a way to try to measure the intensity of support that someone needs. So the supports intensity scale fit well there because it also looks at everyday activities of life. So while you start to think more about why the SIS in Maryland, two other things that stood out, these weren't the only reasons, but they were primary reasons, is that also with the SIS, you get information about medical and behavioral needs. And then there's a focus on employment-related supports. The SIS has an entire domain that's devoted to employment. So they wanted something that would be a fair and reliable way for everyone to be asked those same questions and then be able to use that information. So that's the primary reasons for SIS in Maryland. Now let's dive into the SIS itself and think a little bit more about the fundamentals of SIS. So when you look at a SIS report, realize that these are some of the basics that it was built on. The first is that people with disabilities have the right to explore, dream, think about things that maybe they want to do, just as any of us would. And that we want people with disabilities to have the same rights and responsibilities as other people their age. So when you look at the assessment, you'll also notice that we're talking about adult life activities and things that relate to other people that are of similar age and that live within the community. A couple of other fundamentals is that the SIS offers a chance for people to discover things that maybe they haven't had access to yet or haven't thought about yet. So we want to make sure we can see that as a way for people to experience life and see things in their communities. And then realize that they also can contribute and they're a valued member of their community. So while we talk about the SIS in an interview, that's where you are there to tell more information and come up with the data that you're going to use later. Usually what you're hearing from your interviewer is conversations around, what would it look like if the person were to be involved? And they may give you examples of what each item means. That's building on these fundamentals of SIS. So I'm going to keep us moving here and think a little bit more about, now there's 5 drivers that I want to represent here and just introduce to you. These 5 components of SIS are like the values or the beliefs behind the tool. And it was also the reason why the SIS was created. So there were these 5 things happening in our society, and SIS was there to help just align with and find a way to make sure that those things are being represented fairly across all people. The first is that we had a change in the way we expect things from people with disabilities. So if you'll think about in the early 2000s, even in the late 90s, we were moving away from people with disabilities having real segregated lives and moving into the community. So we wanted to make sure we had a tool that could help them think about what that would look like in community life. Second, we were moving from like a deficits-based or a medical model into more of what we call a functional needs model. What that means when you get a SIS report is that you'll notice every item in the SIS is an action. It's helping you think through what the task or what the activity would look like for that person. The SIS does not include diagnosis. It is not about deficits based, so we're not really concerned with what the person can't do or their skills that they maybe don't have. We want to talk more about the supports that need to be in place to help them function, to help them act and be a part of their communities. Let's look at 3 other drivers that help to develop the SIS, and also you'll see just threaded throughout when you see a report. Again, you might even ask yourself if you're in an interview, why are they asking me this? It's probably because of one of these 5 values. So the third one has to do with cultural and chronologically age-appropriate activities. So every item in the SIS we also talk about with the SIS A is adult life. So we're looking at activities that all adults in the community take part in. Some of them may not fit the person that you love right now or that you're in the interview, and that's okay. The SIS is designed to help you discover and think about what it would look like. So we always are going to ask you more to think about activities and what that would look like so that you'd have it if you need it. Realize that because this is a planning tool, it doesn't mean that you have to go out and do everything in the SIS. Absolutely not. It's more just there so that if you decided to, you would have the plan that you need to do that. Okay, the last 2 are kind of tied together, but person-centered services and supports, this is where that person-centered planning comes in. So as in Maryland, as you think about that person-centered plan, the SIS is in line with that because we want to show the individualized supports, like the help that someone needs based on who they are today and what it would take. So you're going to see a lot of information in the report. In fact, some people might think, boy, this is a lot, and what do I do with it? We give you all that information so that you can just pick and choose what pieces really fit for you to help it stay person-centered and help you think about the services and supports that you need to really direct and fit the life that fits you. And then last but not least is the individualized service support network. So in the SIS, what you'll see is that all the items that we talk about and all the ratings can be provided from anyone, because we know that people get support from more than just people that are paid to be in their life. They have loved ones and friends, and maybe neighbors, and maybe people that they know in the community. So we realize that the network that people with disabilities are a part of, just as all of us are, is interconnected. And so we want to make sure that people realize that the supports that are represented in the SIS can be from any part of your life, and the support can come from anyone. Okay. 3 things to know about the SIS that I think will help you also when you think about why do we measure supports is that first one is based on that we really want to stay away from a person's skill or what they can or can't do. That is just not the focus of the SIS. So you'll hear your interviewers during the assessment ask you more of like, what would the support look like? What's the support or the help the person needs versus what the person can or can't do. We also are capturing in that blue box needed supports. And this one can be a good challenge for teams because sometimes we provide supports that are more convenient, we've just become more comfortable with, or we've just always done it that way. So there'll be times when the SIS interviewer might ask you, what support would it take or what is needed I hear you guys talking about this type of support is what you do now, is that's what's needed. And so sometimes having a chance to talk with the group, these are folks that know that person well and can think through, is this the right support for them? So realize that when you get the report, it represents what's needed. And then last but not least is SIS is strengths-based, which means that we always think about the person involved in every item, even if they're not interested right now or they don't have any plan in doing that. It's if they were, because we always want to think about the potential of that person. We also want to think about who they are. So the traits that make them unique, maybe the things that have helped them become very resilient and resourceful. We want to think of all those pieces as well. So SIS is very much strengths-based, and we help the team thinking and moving forward. When you're in an interview, these are a few components for you to start to think about. Since COVID, we've moved to more virtual assessments. So those of you that have participated in SIS, you may have done it in a similar platform as how you are today, where we come on virtually and attend together. You also may do it in person, which means you all get to sit down at a table and talk more about what the assessment questions are and then think through what those ratings might look like. Either way, I'd say you want to try to find a place that you're going to be comfortable and has some quiet so you can really try to focus in on and be ready to be a part of that assessment. Be ready to share your perspective as well. So that's another reason why it's so nice to have more than one person there, because we want to hear these different perspectives of how, if it's you, the individual, how you feel about every item or what you think about that. And then also the people around you who know you really well, what their perspectives are. So realize that the team is working together to help the interviewer know better of what supports would be the best fit or what it might look like for that person. During the interview, there's a few folks that I want to just make you aware of. If you haven't been through one before, there's these terms that I keep throwing out. And the first is, it's so important that the person be involved in the assessment as much and as comfortable as they'd like to be. So if you're the individual, you are welcome to be a part of that assessment as much as you'd like. For those of you that know the person really well, you might decide there's maybe portions of it that are really good for that person to be there, or maybe you want to try to help them think about how they'll be involved. I might say if you haven't been through one before, go back to that resource page on the AADD website and watch that quick video. It tells you a little bit more about what to expect in the interview and what the SIS is like. The other folks that are there are at least 2 respondents, and a respondent is someone who knows that person well. From AIDD's perspective, we ask that you have known the person at least 3 months and that you have spent some time with them, because we want to have somebody there that can think through, based on your experiences with that individual, what their support would look like, what the help would look like. We ask for at least 2 because then you all get to work together. It can be really taxing if just one interviewer is there with one respondent and that respondent isn't quite sure on things. That second respondent is there to help be that support. So realize that you need at least 2 people that know them well. And then the interviewer. So the interviewer is the individual that is trained to help really explain what the items mean, explain the ratings, and then also determine that final rating based on what you all are maybe sharing or giving perspective on. And right now, the folks that are going to help you with that are Telligent. So if you get a call from Telligent setting up a SIS interview, that's exactly their role. They're neutral, and they're here to help complete those assessments. All right, so let's dive into the assessment itself. And I'm going to just keep moving here. I'm just checking to see if there are questions, or as things come up, please feel free to let us know what you're thinking there. And then Stephanie, also, please let me know if there's questions or things we need to stop and talk any more about. In the meantime,
we'll hold them off to the end.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, I'll just keep talking then. Let's talk now about the SIS itself. So we've talked a little bit about why it's used in Maryland, what the SIS was based on and its values and premise of it. Now let's talk about the tool itself. there are 3 sections of the SIS. The first is Section 1, and it captures the exceptional medical and behavioral support needs of an individual. Section 2 is what we call the Support Needs Index. It's made up of 6 different life domains. And then Section 3 is supplemental. It's about protection and advocacy, and it has 8 items in there that help us think more about how we help someone maybe explore their rights, think about community and what they are to be a part of that community, and what some of those responsibilities are to be a community member. And as you think through those 3 sections, realize that when you get the report, it's actually put in a different order than in the order that I just gave you. And you might be saying to yourself, why is that? The report that you receive, the primary focus is Section 2. So they put that up front because they wanted you to be able to see what the supports would look like for a person through different life activities. So if you want to see Section 1, you might have to scroll through part of the report, and it's now toward the end of that report. They didn't want the focus or the first part you see to be more about medical behavioral needs. Those pieces you probably know pretty well. We wanted to focus in on the planning and exploring that you might do more in Section 2. Having said that, when you're in an interview, Section 1 is where you'll probably start. And the main reason for that is because the interviewer, this is their chance to get to know a little bit more about you or the individual and more of what the medical behavioral needs are. So when you are in this section and when you see this part in your report, realize these are kind of 5 guidelines that explain or represent what the ratings mean. So the first is to realize that we're talking about exceptional supports. So these are supports like over and above routine care. So you're not going to see here a lot of things about diagnosis, and you're not going to see like routine medications or maybe doctor's appointments. We're looking for things over and above that that are unique to that individual. And they have to do with different medical needs. We also want to focus on current support needs. So we're going to think about supports that have been in place in like the last year or so and what you envision needing moving forward. So current supports. We also want to think about supports that are provided by people. So sometimes with medical things that we have in our lives, we have equipment that help us. We have those medications that help us. Those are going to be great parts, and you can always add into the notes of the assessment, but the rating represents the supports that people provide. And then we're going to complete all the items. And this might seem weird, like you're going to sit in the assessment and they're going to ask you about like inhalation and turning and positioning. And so for some folks, you might say, that doesn't fit my life. And that's okay. We just want to make sure we ask everyone all of the questions so that we know for sure. So knowing that some may not apply to you is quite okay. In fact, it gives us a chance to think a little bit more about the ones that do apply to you, where we need to make sure we either put a lot of information in so the interviewer can type in notes on that, or just to make sure they mark it so that when you get your report, you'll be able to look at it quickly and say, yep, that one fits for us. That's why that one's marked. That one aligns to us. So in the medical section, Section 1A, you'll notice these 4 areas. And it's broken up into these 4 areas, and there's 19 items. So we talk a little bit about respiratory care, that's help with breathing. Some folks need help with feeding. Some need help taking care of their skin. The other areas can include all sorts of things, anything from support maybe for managing seizures to maybe help with diabetes management. There's a lot of different things in that other category. Along with that, Section 1B is the exceptional behavioral support area. It too has 4 different sections, and it's broken up into 13 items into those 4 areas. You'll notice we have externally directed behavior, though those are supports for behaviors that might impact others. And then there's self-directed behaviors. Those are behaviors that impact the person. We have sexual behaviors, those that are inappropriate sexual behavior, that would be included here. And then you'll notice this other category as well. And it can include things like prevention from wandering, or maybe prevention of substance abuse. Again, you're going to be asked all the questions and you're going to see all the items in your report, but you may find that only certain ones really rate or really fit for you, and that's quite okay. Here's how we're going to answer those. So with this rating key, we have 3 options. It's either a 0, there's no exceptional support, and that might be because it just doesn't fit you. The item doesn't even fit your life, 0. But it also might be because you don't need any like exceptional over and above significant help. So for some folks, maybe you have a diagnosis of a seizure, but you don't need any support around it. Maybe you haven't had a seizure for years. Maybe the medication is doing the work for you, so you don't have to worry about having that seizure or people around to help support you for that. So a 0 could still fit if the person is like managing the condition on their own or people aren't needed to help with it. A 1, some exceptional support, lines more into if someone needs to be always monitoring and keeping track of what that person's needs might be, always ready to help and jump in and assist. And then when they do jump in and assist, it's probably episodic. It doesn't happen a lot, or if you do, it doesn't take a lot of time. A 1 also sometimes is best fit for a need that isn't in every environment. So maybe it's only at home I get this help, but in other parts of my life I don't need it. So a 1 represents some support. Whereas a 2, extensive exceptional support, is just that, it's extensive. It's a lot of hands-on support. It's a lot of work on part of the supporter, the people who help that person, and it can really take a lot of time and energy. So that 2 is better suited for that support that's going to be really intense, take a lot of time, maybe needed in every environment, could be a lot of help that's needed. So in section 1, our rating is 0, 1, or a 2. Okay, when you're getting the report, it may look something like this. So this is an example of section 1A, the medical section. You'll notice the first 4 are highlighted. And then also you'll notice that it's ranked out of order. So like on the screen, you'll notice number 8, turning and positioning for this individual is first. It's because they've scored in that section as a higher score. So it's ranked in order of highest number. And it still lists all the items. They're still going to be there even if you scored a 0. But those that you scored higher are going to be at the top to make it easier for you when you're planning to make sure that you've captured those supports. So if you're a CCS, it's also a great place for me to, I would go here and just check to make sure it lines up with what you know about the medical needs or the behavior needs. And then also realize that you can always add comments. You can always put in information here. So if you're in the interview and there's certain things that you are talking about that you want to make sure are put somewhere on a record, tell that interviewer and they can add it in as a comment. Let's move to section 2. So again, section 1, exceptional medical behavior. Section 2 is now what's called the support needs index. It's made up of 6 life domains. So you'll see here in this pie, there's these different life domains. It talks about home living and community living, lifelong learning. You'll also notice that I've added in the number of items. Usually it's around 8 items per domain that you're going to get questions about, and you're going to get to think about more of what that part of life might look like and what you might need to support. Here again, you're going to look at every item that's a part of this. And there's 4 guidelines that I'd like you to start to become familiar with. If you haven't been in a SIS, these are the guidelines that the interviewer is going to share with you. If you're looking at the report, the reason these 4 are really important to know is that it will help you better understand what the ratings mean. So when you see a rating in the report, and when you're thinking about what the rating is in the interview, here's the first thing you got to know, is that we want to make sure we capture what support is needed. So it's not necessarily what's current or available. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes what's needed just lines right up and you're doing it now, and that's great. But realize that there are going to be other times when you're talking about something and you might be thinking, we haven't done this before. I don't know. We're always going to think of what it would need. What would it take? and realize that you're not limited by what services you have now. We want to make sure the SIS shows you what support would be needed, and we're going to talk more about at what standard, and that's at that community standard. So if you're talking about something like transportation and you're thinking about how often would support be needed for transportation, don't have to limit yourself to say, well, right now I only have transportation twice a week. Think more about how often would the support be needed for you to be successful. And that's what the items and that's what the ratings are going to represent in your report. In fact, we're going to think about the support you need for success with all items. And by success, what I'm thinking about here is the same standard we'd set for anyone else in your community. So when you think about being successful at something, even like in community, there's an item around shopping. Shopping might be something you love to go and do. And so the interviewer is going to say, well, great, then let's think about maybe support you might need to pick out things in the store, get them up to the front and pay for them. Some of you might be thinking, oh, those aren't all steps that I do. That's okay. We're going to help you understand what success means and what that standard usually looks like within the community for you to realize and figure out what the support would look like. So an interviewer is going to tell you more about what to expect and what each standard is so that you can know each and every item, what success would look like, what would it take. The third one is that we're always going to rate the person with assistive devices in place. So when we think about this, there's 3 reasons I've put on the slide, but there's a lot of reasons we do this. Even think for yourself, if you were going to take another test, even for me, if I was going to take something and they took away my glasses, I would not do very well because I can't see. But with my glasses, I can do so many more things in my life. So we want the same to be in place. We want to think about the independence a person has because of the devices they use. And if they use them now, then you can keep that in place. We also want to make sure we think about what's working for the person. So if they have maybe they use a chair, an electric chair that works really well for them, I don't want to take that chair away and then try to rate them. I want to keep that chair in place. Helps us to stay individualized as well. Last but not least, we're going to complete all of the items. And it really comes down to fairness and opportunity. We want to make sure that you have the same opportunities as everyone else. So there might be times when you're like, why is she asking me this question? This is not even of interest to me. It's because we want to make sure everyone gets the chance to think about what it would look like and that same opportunity. All right, so those were our 4. When you're in the SIS, we're always going to think of that person first. So keep that person in mind, the support it's going to take to be successful. And that's what we're measuring. There are a couple of ways to think about this visually. So I've just added a couple of ways that might help you, because when you get asked the question in the interview, or when you're looking even at the report and you're seeing what the ratings are, this might not always be at the forefront of your mind, because you might look at a rating and be like, why did they rate that? It's likely because at the time they were thinking more about what support would look like for success at that same community standard. So you're thinking about the person plus help from everyone else. What would that be? And so this might be another visual way to help you with that. I've been talking a lot about more of what success looks like. Now let's talk about how we get there. So with every item, we're going to think about that individual's involvement. We're going to think strength-based and their potential. And then we're going to think about 3 ratings that help us figure out how to get to that community standard. It includes type of support, frequency of support, and daily support time. So I want to break down those ratings a little bit for you. If you've been in a SIS assessment, you've also received a respondent guide, and it's the same thing that you see here on the screen. If you have received the report and you're wondering more of like what these ratings mean, there is some detail in the report, but if you want to go back and look at your respondent guide to say, okay, what was a 1, what was a 2, this might be a nice resource to have. So just briefly, when you think about type of support, we're going to think of the one that best represents the person, because you might be saying, well, sometimes I do monitoring, sometimes I need to coach them. So we're going to think through the one that like overall best fits for the item that we're talking about. So we have some monitoring reminders, that'd be a 1. We have verbal gesture prompting. Oftentimes I think of this more as like coaching. 3, partial physical assistance. This is help through doing, which usually looks like maybe some parts are done by a supporter and then other parts the person can be involved in, maybe with being coached through what to do, or maybe there's parts that they do and don't need as much help. A 3 might be a good fit there. A 4 is full physical support, which means that we really just see other people doing something on the person's behalf. We can't envision the person be involved in the activity. So that 4 is really for that person who needs something done and it's required for them to be done. All right, once we've got type of support, we move to that middle column and we think through the frequency of support. So how often is the support really needed? And you'll notice we have a range here too. So again, we're talking about how often the support is needed, which sometimes is different than how often the person does the activity. So as you think through how often is the help really needed, we've got 0, none, or it doesn't happen very much, less than monthly. A 1 is more on a monthly basis. A 2 is more weekly, and that can be even up to 6 days a week. A 3 is daily, that's like 7 days a week. And then a 4 is pretty rare because it's every hour on the hour. This one also includes like sleep time. So we don't always see that 4 very often. Last but not least, the third rating that we think about is daily support time. So on the day that we're there to help support the person, we're adding up the moments of support. And that support could, again, come from anyone. So there are some activities where you might think, oh, that could happen in a lot of different places. For instance, there's one around, let's see, that might be a good fit. It's not much fun to talk about, but something like using the toilet or using the restroom, like the support you might need at home, but maybe you need some support when you go out to eat, or maybe when you're in the community doing something, you might need help there. We're going to add up all the supports that are needed throughout the day. So it means that you might have to add up these moments in time and find the range that would best fit on like a typical day. So we've got none is needed. We've got up to 30 minutes for a 1. 2 gives us up to 2 hours. 3, 4 hours. 4 is 4 hours or more. So once we figured out those 3 ratings, this is how it would look if you've received a report. This is somehow or how it would look. So in this case, I've given you an example of employment. So again, you'll notice they're out of order. It's because they've taken what the total score is, the highest total score, and ranked it, put it on the top. If I'm a CCS and I'm starting to look through this report, or even if I'm a provider or a family member, I might start to think through, okay, why was this one rated higher? And it might be for a lot of reasons. One is because maybe it's something that's going to take a lot of time, just by the nature of the item. That's okay too. So while you're thinking through type, frequency, daily support time, it gives you some basics about what those mean. But if you wanted more information, or you wanted to remember, oh yeah, what do we mean by verbal gesture prompting? Go back to your respondent guide and use that, and think about words like maybe coaching, or showing them what to do, or modeling things, so that you get more familiar with what does that really represent. A quick note here too, that when you're thinking about employment and you see this section, realize that these 8 items are usually the reasons that people with disabilities either are not hired or they don't keep a job if they're not supported well. So think of this as like your job description for your job coach. So as you're starting to think through if employment is right for you, and you want to think through what it would take, realize that you're representing here a community standard, which is more of like 5 to 6 days a week, 6 to 8 hours a day. But maybe you decide you only want to focus on type of support. Or maybe you want to realize as a team, how are we going to tackle all 8 of these things, these items, so that the person's going to be successful, even if they're working for just a couple of hours. Have we thought of all these things so that we're ready? So that might be a helpful way for you to use that employment section. There are some standard scores as well, and those might be helpful for you to think about, like overall scores. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here though, because really at the individualized level, I would like you more to think about what do each rating mean within the domain versus the overall. So I would say if you're a provider though, and you say, or maybe CCS, and you work with more than one individual, realize that it could be a way for you to compare across the people you work with and think about maybe staffing needs, or maybe more about what kind of support you need to provide. So realize that the higher the number, the more support that's needed. And if you're looking at the report, the support needs index, or the SNE, we call it, is that final one, and it represents the overall need. Here you can see an example for Adam, and for Adam, he has different areas that need more support, like social activities and lifelong learning, but overall his support needs index is pretty low, it's a 13. Whereas someone like Chris might need a little bit more support, and you can see how it's very individualized for Chris, different levels of support. Same for, just to give you a sample of Brooke. So here you can see Brooke has these different areas of support across those 6 life domains, and then that support need index to tell you that. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on that because I'd rather you get a focus on individualized planning, and that's diving into those domains and taking a look at them. As well as I'd say section 3. Take a look at those 8 items, think through how they can really help someone. Okay, so I've talked a little bit more about the SIS itself. Our last 15 minutes or so, I want to make sure we have time for questions and can answer those things, and some different ways to help with planning. So if it's okay, I'd say, can we take maybe 5 or 6 more minutes and I just introduce some of these strategies? And then we'll answer some questions, or how's it looking? I want to just stop there and see how we're doing.
It's 11:42. Can you do it in 3 minutes?
Yep, you bet.
Okay.
Sure. Yep. So the other thing that's nice about these 3 strategies is when you go to our website, you can also try out these 3. So know that just seeing it here doesn't mean it's the last time you need to see it. So first idea is to compare information. Second idea is to think about the importance of information. And the third is to align your outcomes. So what do we mean by that? First one, I'll give you just a look at this. So when you think about your focus area of exploration, realize that the SIS can very much line up with that. So I've put them side by side. They don't perfectly match, but they're very close. So when you think through, and maybe you're talking about employment, take a look at the employment activities within the SIS and see if that can also help inform which way you want to go and what things you want to talk about. It might help you point out to maybe like big picture things, like if you've ranked something really high, maybe there's a reason for that, and let's address it as a team. The second component that I'd like you to I really encourage you to do this one. Realize that any item in the SIS can be marked as important to or important for. You've just got to let the interviewer know it, and they can mark it for you. So if something's important to an individual, that matters to them, it's something that maybe is really of interest to them, and it's an item that you can mark and you can make a note. If something's important for the person, oftentimes that can come from the person as well. They realize it's important for them, but also team members might realize this, and maybe it's something about health and safety or something they need to learn. So please think about what, as you're going through an interview, what things are really important to or important for the person. Because if you mark them in the interview, when you get the report, they're pulled out for you. So you don't have to go through every domain to find those. It's in a separate place in the domain, and or into the report, and you could go just straight there and find the ones that are most important for the person. And then there's also a list of what's most important to. So I'd highly encourage you to think about, if you're in an interview or getting ready for an interview, or you've talked to people who are getting ready, think about what's important to or important for. You can mark it right there in the assessment. Last but not least, let's think a little bit more about aligning. So on the screen, sorry about that. So aligning with your outcomes. I'll give you 4 for you to start to think of how you might do that. First is to remember that supports that you see in the report are based on success at that community standard. So you might say, you know what, we don't need to worry about getting all of those things in place. Let's just start at a step that makes sense for that person. So even if the support is like partial support every day for 2 hours, you might decide, you know what, let's try partial support weekly for now. And maybe it's going to take us just 30 minutes. And we're going to just focus in and start to move toward what the support would look like for success. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So as you start to think through what do those things mean for the person, based on what you answered when you were in the interview, you might find there's a gap between there, and you want to just start small. Starting small, starting to create outcomes that really fit for that person and where they are now can actually really help them grow. So start to think a little bit more about how you can use the information, but not feel like you have to achieve every item or complete or even look at every item in the SIS. That can sometimes be overwhelming for folks. So pick the ones that fit for you. So I know we're at 46 here, so let me just do a quick summary of what we've talked about today. I started with 5 drivers. Remember, those are the drivers that help create the SIS. They included things like functional models and helping you think about person-centered planning. The SIS has 3 sections: the exceptional medical, support needs index, and the supplemental protection and advocacy. There are 9 subscales within the SIS. 6 of them are in section 2. 2 of them are in section 1, and then the supplemental is the 3rd, or is the 9th. There are 2 rating keys. So section 1 has a rating key, 0, 1, or 2. Section 2 has 3 areas, 3 dimensions: type of support, frequency of support, daily support time. In section 2, there are 4 guidelines to remember, and they all really center around the idea of thinking about the person's potential and what success would look like. And we're going to complete every item as if the person were to be involved in that item, even if you don't have an interest in it right now. And then last but not least, I gave you 3 ways to use SIS. So a couple of ideas there on how to do that. So with that, I'll stop talking and I'll stop the presentation and see if we can answer some questions. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Natalie. Our first question is the SIS results being uploaded in LTSS? And the answer to that is yes, normally. We're having a little bit of problem right now, but it is being addressed by our IT department. As a provider, can the CCS or individual share the SIS? The SIS should be shared with the team. The results should be shared with the team for planning purposes. Let's see. Someone asked if they could follow up, and I answered yes, you can follow up. My email I put in the chat, but it's also, or in the question and answer, but it's stephanie.jones2@maryland.gov. Let's see here. Oops. How has the instrument been validated? Natalie?
Sure, yeah, I can try to address that.
I thought I lost you.
So the way it's been validated, so when it was originally normed, it was a mix of people with different intellectual and developmental disabilities from about 33 states and a couple of Canadian provinces. So that makes up that normed tool. Since then, with SIS Online, we've had, oh boy, over 100,000 folks who have helped to just reinforce that the norm is working well. I think there was a question around like what percentage of different disabilities are represented, and I can find that and tell you for sure if that would help too. So when we think about like the demographics of the people that were part of that original norm, it includes, here we go. So like deafness or hearing impairments were at 7%. I don't want to go into too many of these. Autism was at 6% of the represented group. Speech language impairments included folks that were up to 30%. So there's kind of a mix, just so you know that those were all represented in helping to create that norm.
Someone asked how could they get a SIS completed for their son. Please reach out to your regional office, and because it's they don't have a CCS now, and see about applying. And then once you apply and get a CCS and get approved for DDA services, the SIS will be assigned. Oh, we're getting more questions in. It's rolling so fast. Hold on. Let's see. Okay. How is the overall support index in the graph? How is the overall support index in the graph calculated? I guess the index score.
Yeah, I would say the index score is going to give you the standard score. It's calculated through a total raw score. So it's in section 2, it's adding up type, frequency, daily support. Those are added up. And then over the 8 or 9 items, those are added up. From there, you can find that standard score.
Thank you. How often is the SIS completed? In Maryland, the SIS is completed every 5 years after the initial one. Let's see what is being done to schedule these. The SIS, the way LTSS automatically sends a list, because it says I'm a CCS and many of the SIS evaluations were overdue. How do we schedule them? And the LTSS Maryland speaks to the online SIS and creates a list of individuals, sends out a list of SIS to do. So if you reach out to your regional office and they can help you schedule those SIS if they're out of, if they're overdue. Let's see the next one. They said, just to kind of, I'm going to summarize this one. They want to know if they disagree with an answer that the assessor put, can they stop the SIS at that point during the exam?
Yeah, I think the goal is always to try to figure out why and work through it as a team. But if there's a reason you don't agree with the rating or it's not making sense to you, then I would say, yeah, or even the interviewer might decide maybe they need more information or maybe you need someone else there to help you out. So yeah, you can always stop an interview.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. It asks, is the SIS going to be used in determining funding? No, and the state of Maryland has not chosen to use the SIS that way. It's simply just to help with planning and assuring that people are getting the most appropriate level of care. Is a plain language resource, so is there a plain language resource for families?
Yeah, I would say the greatest is at that respondent resource page. So the videos are there, they are closed captioned. The respondent guide and the handbook is there, so you can print it out and use it as you'd like.
Is there any specific information that needs to be pulled from the SIS results and be added to the PCP, or is that information that the PCP should mention? So I think you went over some things that were important to look at in relations to the SIS and outcomes. If you want to just kind of,
Yeah, I wouldn't say
Summarize
anything
that.
is, yeah, nothing's required for sure. It's more that you've just used it as a resource that's going to really fit for that person. And yeah, we went through like 3 strategies, ways to do that, but realize that you don't have to.
Okay. Let's see some questions. Uh, it says such a long assessment doesn't really allow for much of the participant for self-advocates or ID who doesn't have attention span long. Is there a way to break it up, or is there a solution to that so that the person can be fully involved?
Absolutely. Yep. So when you're setting up the interview, I might say, I'm not sure if intelligent folks are on, but when you schedule the assessment, make sure you figure out what that would look like and maybe even pick a place that's best for the individual. Sometimes we have folks that like to kind of come in and out during the interview. So maybe you put a place where they can choose to participate when they want to, or maybe you decide that you need more time. Letting them know up front will really help with that.
Is there a number you could share, Natalie, or email for them to speak with AAIDD directly to ask
I'd say the
questions?
Yeah, I'd say the best is go back to that resource page, and right on the resource page it says contact us. That'll send you directly to the supports intensity scale director, and that's probably the best way to get AIDD, and they'll get back to you that way.
What is the focus of Section 3?
Section 3 is the supplemental protection and advocacy section. So it's 8 items that have to do with helping someone learn how to advocate for themselves and others. It has to do with managing money, different ways that we help people protect themselves and then also figure out how to speak up for themselves.
What is the intra-observer variability? I'm not sure what that means. So, what is the maximum time frame to administer the SIS?
I don't know if there's a maximum time. I know that some assessments take longer than others just because of the discussion or the complexity of needs. I'd say they probably average around 2 hours, but if you need more time, I would think that'd be quite okay. The interviewer is there to help make sure that they get all the assessment completed.
Okay. SIS A is, Maryland only does the SIS A. It says, when will the SIS A be implemented? So your initial SIS will be the SIS A when you're coming into DDA services, or if you've been in DDA services and you haven't had your initial one yet, it will be the SIS A. Again, we answered how often is it done? Every 5 years after initial. If you're in Rockville, that's the Southern Region office. Let's see. I'm looking for questions specifically for you. Who is completing the SIS? I think you touched on that, but if you want to talk about the assessors and their training.
Sure. Yeah. So Telegen is the agency that that completes the assessments now. They are trained by AIDD, so we work closely with the team, and then also they have a trainer. So Telegen is the group that you would hear from to get the SIS completed.
Okay, we have a suggestion here. It said it would be very helpful to have a video modeling a sample of SIS with a team examiner. This would be helpful for families and individuals to really understand how it works and how many people really know how, because it can feel a little overwhelming for families. And it is 12 o'clock exactly. So for the questions we were unable to get to, we will respond to at a later time, at a and I'll probably do a FAQ and to respond to your questions, anything that is personal, or I'll go through them and respond directly to you. Also, I want to thank Natalie. If we can do our last poll. I thank everyone for coming and being here. Okay. Oh, great. So I'm glad this was very helpful. Our poll shows that this webinar has been helpful. That's wonderful news. So thank you again, Natalie. Thank you everyone for spending your lunchtime with us today. And we look for, again, my email is stephanie.jones2@maryland.gov. Thank you so much, and have a great day.